Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night, depending on where you are in the world. I hope all well. I'm going to do exactly what it says on the tin. I'm going to talk about what has been happening in Afghanistan. However, like always, let's begin with prayer first. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Glory to you, O Lord. O Lord, glory to you. O Heavenly King, O Comforter, the Spirit of truth, who are in all places and fill all things, the treasury of good things and the giver of life, come and abide in us, cleanse us from every stain, and save our souls, O Good One. Holy God, holy mighty, holy immortal, have mercy on us. Glory to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, now and forever, and unto the ages of ages, world without end. O most holy Trinity, have mercy on us. O Lord, cleanse us from our sins. O Master, pardon our transgressions. O Holy One, visit and heal our infirmities, for your name's sake. Lord, have mercy. Glory to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, now and forever and ever, unto the ages of ages, world without end. Amen. So, the way that I'm going to do this, guys, depending on how long it takes me to get through what I want to do, I may or may not take questions. Let me just adjust something so that I'm not stood here with a giant shade over my face. Bear with us. That didn't help much. So what I'm going to be doing is interacting with a news report by Channel 4 News. Channel 4 News is a YouTube channel that you can find on YouTube. It's been clearly referenced, and I'm going to be engaging with that in fair commentary. So, yeah, if I have time afterwards, I'll take questions, but if not, then I'm afraid I won't be interacting much with the chat. I should just say that I do owe you guys one chat on muscular Christianity, because we put it out there as a vote. You know, once we pass 10,000 subscribers, what topic did you want me to talk on? And the unanimous decision was to pick the topic of muscular Christianity. So I will talk about that. That will happen. I just haven't got around to organizing it yet. And what else did I want to say? Yeah, my channel is shadow banned, and so please bear that in mind. I should probably have done this before angling the camera. Should have done that before I went live. Never mind. But my channel is shadow banned by the lovely people at YouTube. So please do, please do share, like, and subscribe, and encourage other people to do the same. Okay then, so without much further ado, let me pull up the video that I want to pull in. Bear with me while I try to figure out how to do this, because I always get this wrong. Always. So I'm going to press that. No, I don't. Maybe that then. Hold on. There is something that I need to do. Share, that was it. So if I click that one and then share screen. Right, hold on. Okay, so I share that one. And I want to share the audio as well. Remember to do that this time. Right, there you go. Great stuff. So I won't be able to see my screen. I'll just be able to see the video, and I'm gonna stop it and start it as I need to talk about the things that I want to talk about. However, let's just do a quick sound test first.
All day long, the helicopters went to and from.
Can you guys confirm that you can hear that?
Ferrying diplomatic staff, including the acting ambassador, to the airport, dropping flares to deter Taliban anti-aircraft fire.
Can you confirm that you can hear that?
If you think that sounds like Saigon in 1975, you're not alone.
Is that a yes or a no?
A month ago, President Biden said it was highly unlikely
yes,
that the
thank
Taliban
you. Brilliant.
would overrun everything and take the country. Today, all day long, the helicopter.
Right then, so let's get this back here. I'll just change that up a bit. There we go, that's looking better, isn't it? Right then, so you can hear, brilliant, we'll begin. Guys, bear in mind, I won't be able to monitor the chat while I'm doing this. So you guys are going to be on your own whilst I talk about what we're hearing in the news. Okay, let's start.
Helicopters went to and from the American embassy, ferrying diplomatic staff, including the acting ambassador, to the airport, dropping flares to deter Taliban anti-aircraft fire. If you think that sounds like Saigon in 1975, you're not alone. A month ago, President Biden said it was highly unlikely that the Taliban would overrun everything and take the country.
So this is my first point, is what on earth does that say about President Biden's ability to make judgments, his ability to understand the situation on the ground or to decide policy that is reasonable and realistic? Now, he either did know, and his advisors were telling him that, yeah, it will collapse quickly, in which case he lied to the world, or, let's give him the benefit of the doubt, he didn't lie to the world. He actually thought that things wouldn't collapse so quickly, and thus both him and his regime have made a catastrophic misjudgment about the situation in Afghanistan. And immediately the thought arises of the comparator to Trump. If the Trump regime had made such a catastrophic misjudgment, how would the media be framing that? How would the media be talking about that? So that's my first thought. Let's carry on.
Today, he said nothing. The British 16th Air Assault Brigade arrived in Kabul to help evacuate British citizens. The ambassador has remained at the airport, apparently personally processing the visas of Afghan interpreters who will also be flown to the UK if they qualify. Now,
I think that every Western power that has had someone who is an Afghani interpreter, had troops on the ground that were supported by Afghans, that those Afghans that supported our forces should be allowed the right to come with their immediate families to the UK. I think that is the honourable thing to do. It's the least that we can do for people who were willing to put their lives in danger to help our troops in their fight against Islamists. And I think that if we can't do that, then shame on us. But and I'll probably end up talking about this a bit later on, but I think that we shouldn't, as has been reported today, just open up the doors to Afghan refugees unless we're taking in women. I think, because it's been reported today in the UK media that we're going to take in 20,000 Afghans. Well, personally, minus the number of men that helped our armed forces, that should be near enough 20,000 women and no one else. Because what we've got at the moment is we've got a policy of taking in people without filter, without spectrum. The legal processes have completely broken down. And we, amongst people that are coming in that are desperate, we're also letting in genuinely bad people. However, just as a demographic truth, women are less involved in hard crime. And the women in Afghanistan, particularly, who don't want to live under that terrible regime, should be given the opportunity to leave all of that behind if they don't want to live under Islamic law, and to live a life outside of that. And I don't think that it's necessarily the case that we have to take them all in, but I think that the world should be generous to Afghan women, particularly, to give them safe harbor from what is ultimately a savagely misogynist, and I use that in the common sense of the term, Islamic law.
At the airport, thousands of desperate Afghans were trying to leave. Those who worked for the government or international organizations are terrified. Taliban officials drew crowds inside the city. Who knows if the people are motivated by genuine enthusiasm, curiosity, or fear of what will happen to them if they fail to support their new rulers?
And I think that's a fair question. I mean, but there's like the Taliban didn't win just because lots of people supported them. The thing about the Afghan people is they cheer for whoever was ruling them at the time. And I think that's what we're seeing here. I don't think, but I do also think that just generally within the Islamic world, and particularly within Afghanistan, there is a support for the idea of Sharia law, and resentment against what was seen as an occupation by many. And, it's hard to put numbers on it. You can't obviously know, but we're not talking small numbers of support for the Taliban in Afghanistan, nor I think are we talking about small numbers of people who didn't want the Taliban there either. I think that, I don't think it's simple as saying 50-50, but we're still talking about a lot on each side of the argument, whatever that number happens to be.
Kabul has been conquered, says the commander. Under the Sharia, your health and wealth are secure.
Now, guys, this is the mantra and the line of Islamists everywhere, this utopian vision that, if you just let Sharia law rule, that everything's going to be great. Like, the communists said it, the Nazis said it, every kind of utopian description of society you should be suspicious of, because the reality is human beings are sinful creatures and they will ruin any system, no matter what it is. And the reality is Sharia law is a savage, backward system of laws that discriminate against minorities of all kinds, particularly Christians and Jews. We're going to hear a bit more about this, but I want to point out something about how the media report this.
When they ruled in the 1990s, the health of women and minorities, including the Shia Hazaras, was far from secure.
Now, this is an important point, guys, because as far back as 2014, even earlier maybe, like, I knew that this wouldn't win. We wouldn't win there, because the Western powers were unwilling to tackle the hatred against apostates, and were unwilling to tackle the hatred against Afghans that had converted to Christianity. In 2014, an Afghan woman converted to Christianity. She had to go into hiding. I think a few years before that, there was a Christian brother who had converted from, Islam. He'd become a Christian. His life was in danger, and the Western powers didn't challenge it. They didn't try to tackle that attitude. All they did was say, well, we're going to take this guy out. And they gave him safe haven somewhere else. I forget which country he went to. But the reality is, the West lost in Afghanistan because it wasn't willing to convert the Afghan people out of Islam, nor was it willing to defend the rights of Afghanis to leave Islam. And the fact that they were willing to concede to that level of bigotry and hatred that is cultivated within Islam and Sharia law is exactly the reason why the root, as it were, one of the key ingredients to our defeat.
Whatever they say, they believe in flogging, hand-cutting, and the suppression of women. Their ideology has not changed.
Now, also note here, just for a minute, guys, how the liberal media is so averse to saying the word Christian. They talked about Shia, they talked about women, but they won't talk about Christians. They won't talk about the plight of Christians in Afghanistan, or the fact that Christians in Afghanistan have to live in secret. And this is a consistent thing in the liberal media. They always obfuscate on the question of the persecuted church.
In the morning, President Ashraf Ghani addressed the nation, saying that the Afghan security forces should be responsible for people's safety. By the evening, all that remained was his image. He had fled to Tajikistan, to the derision of his deputy, who was left to negotiate surrender with the Taliban.
Did you know that in the UK...
Let's just skip this ad as soon as we can.
Loans, overdrafts, and overdue bills.
There we go.
The former president left Afghanistan and the nation in its current state. He will have to answer to God. And the people of...
I don't think he should. I think what should happen is that the world puts pressure on whichever country is giving him safe harbour and forces return back to Afghanistan.
Afghanistan will also make their own judgment. I wish you all patience. May God help you all. And may these difficult days and nights soon be over.
People queued at the banks to withdraw their savings. Some because they hope to leave the country, others because who knows what will happen next, whether the Taliban will respect the banking system or any system. Still, survival means adapting.
Everyone is tired of war, explosions and suicide attacks. Now things have changed. God is merciful, and we hope an Islamic system will be established in the country and there will be peace and stability.
And that's the thing, guys, is that, like, we have tried to impose a model of culture, a model of society onto the Afghan people, to which their own values, to which their own doctrines don't have synergy. They don't agree with the idea of democracy. It doesn't agree, it doesn't agree with democracy. It doesn't agree with the idea of rights for minorities. It doesn't believe that all people are equal and of equal worth. And the reality is that because we didn't tackle that, then the people they wanted Islam. Well, Islam is the Taliban. I heard in the parliamentary debate today an MP, and I'm going to do a response video to her as well, saying that this isn't Islam, this is thuggery or savagery or something. Well, all these overnight experts on Islam actually just need to read some history and read some books, because the Taliban are expressing Sharia law. That is what they're doing. And because you were not willing to seek the conversion of the souls of the Afghan people, that is the reason why people will always choose their God over the state, you know. Though we'll come back to that a bit later in this talk as well.
Politicians are adapting too. Humayun, once deputy parliamentary speaker, said today that he's the new Taliban police chief. Discussions about switching sides must have been going on behind the scenes for months. In Kunar province, boys threw stones and shoes at Afghan troops who'd fled without offering any resistance to the Taliban. "You're cowards," they shouted. The Americans are also keen to blame the incompetence of the Afghan National Army.
Now, here's the thing, like, were they calling them cowards because they wanted them to fight the Taliban, or were they calling them cowards because they are taunting the defeated? And this is a really important thing about how we recognize the media frame narratives and frame discussion. It's not clear why they're calling them cowards, but it is true that the Afghan army were cowardly, and their strength evaporated the moment we pulled out. And the reality is the West approached the Afghan army. I remember Biden, when he did his talk about these events, and he said, or even before these events, when he was asked about whether Afghanistan would fall, and he turned around and he said, you know, they had an army of 300,000. But that 300,000 people were not there because they wanted to fight for a country called Afghanistan. These people are tribal in their mentality, not nation state in their mentality. They were there for bread and butter issues. They wanted a paycheck to pay their families. People don't fight because you give them nice guns. People don't fight because you even train them to fight. People fight because you give them a reason why. You answer the why question. And that is why the Taliban, who were clearly outnumbered and should have been outgunned in every way, won, because they are fighting for a reason, whereas the Afghan army had no reason to fight at all. And this is, again, the reason why we should have sought over the last 20 years the conversion of Afghanistan. We should have been open to the idea of converting Afghanistan, because if those people had changed their beliefs genuinely, then they would have had a reason to fight. But they didn't. They had no reason to fight. The progressives have just approached this from the thought of, well, if we build buildings and roads and infrastructure, people's attitudes and mentalities will change. And it just doesn't work. It's a failed attitude from a failed worldview. Compare this progressive experiment in colonialism to the colonialism of Europe in the past, or the colonialism of the Islamic Empire, that sought to convert people to ideas. The European colonialists sought to convert people to the ideas of the Enlightenment, and the Islamic world have embraced those ideas. They believe in the nation state, you know, in places like Egypt. They're very nationalistic in places like Syria and so on. They believe in, you know, I say the conversion was partial, not complete, but because it only lasted for about 100 years or so. But that embedded ideas in that time. But in 20 years, when all you're doing is building schools but you're not actually arguing for the change of mind, of course you're going to lose, because you're sowing into hard ground.
And not their own perfidy.
The fact is, we invested, the international community invested over 20 years, billions of dollars in these forces, 300,000 of them, with an air force, something the Taliban didn't have, with the most modern, sophisticated equipment. And unfortunately, tragically, they have not been able to defend the country. And I think that explains why this has moved as quickly as it's moved.
Tonight, the Taliban declared that once again Afghanistan is an Islamic emirate. They're the power now, and Western governments have abandoned Afghans to their fate.
And that is the thing. We have. I mean, let's be clear. Another Islamic caliphate, another Islamic emirate, another Islamic government is not unusual. There's one in Iran. There's one in Saudi Arabia. There was until recently one in North Sudan, though they've come wise and abandoned the whole idea. And ISIS established one in Iraq and Syria. But the thing is, these Islamic states, Iran is hostile to us. Saudi Arabia is hostile to us. They are the ones that have spread Wahhabism across the world. They have spread Salafism across the world. And yet we, for the sake of oil, continue to treat them as if they are our allies. And now we have Afghanistan. And in all of these countries, Christians are persecuted. In all of these countries, it is illegal for people to become Christians. We have abandoned the Afghan people, at least that section of them that didn't want to live under Sharia law. But and the reality is, the progressives just can't see the real world for what it is. They can't describe it accurately because their ideology doesn't have the framework to give them the accurate language to describe it. And so Christians, we need to wake up to recognize that we need to support our brothers and sisters, regardless of what any nation state does. We now have a society in the control of a radical Islamist movement, and that will be a magnet for Islamic radicals across the world, of which there's upwards of 40 million. It doesn't matter what promises the Taliban give the West, they are going to become a hotbed of international terrorism.
Lindsay Hilson. Well, earlier today, I spoke to Farzana Kochai, an Afghan MP who's chosen to remain in Kabul. I asked her what life's like in the city now.
After that, then I saw that there are some gunfire a little bit far from the center of the city, but in Kabul. And there was an announcement and a message that people were sharing that Taliban will get to the Kabul city. And the people just got to their houses, and now the city is like a sleep city. You think that no one lives here, that millions of people who are living in Kabul just disappeared in between minutes or hours. It was so difficult time. It's so difficult yet.
Are you still an MP? Is there still a parliament?
Actually, I don't know, because the things just changed in hours. So some says that President Ghani is not in Kabul anymore. He has left it. Dr. Abdullah said that. And the government itself, I don't know, everything is left to the Taliban in provinces. And I don't know what the settlement, the political settlement is like. No one talks about that.
The Taliban say nobody in Kabul has anything to fear. Everybody will be safe. People must be calm. everything will be okay. Do you believe them?
I can't believe them. No one can. For those who can do anything to make themselves safe and don't take the risk of these announcements, they are actually doing that. They are not taking risk. No one can take risk of life. Like, it's a big thing. It can't.
And this is where you know, these Islamists are going to demonstrate once again what Islam looks like, as they are already doing. They are going to take women as war booty, and then they are going to give them out as sex slaves. It's something that we've spoke about at the corner countless times. It's something that we've evidenced from the Quran. It's something that we've evidenced from the Hadiths. It's something that the Taliban are doing right now, and yet our liberal progressives continue to kid themselves into thinking that the Taliban are not Islamic, when they clearly are. And so the reality is that the rest of us need to steel up, and we need to accept what it is that we're facing, rather than daydreaming and hoping that somehow this Islamist movement that follows a religion that teaches about conquering and dominating the world is just something that is going to civilize. It's not going to civilize. And Muslim Islamists believe in using lying as part of jihad because they see it as a tactic of war, and they see the realms of the unbeliever as the theater of war. And so doing taqiyya to the unbeliever for tactical advantage is considered completely appropriate within their mindset. And we pretend to our detriment that it is some other way. Okay.
And to be handled once it comes. So no one can take that risk. I personally am confused here. When the Taliban came at first to the Kandahar and Tahar provinces, they did something that is anti everything. Like, it's not, we can't expect that as a human being, as an Afghan, as a Muslim. So we are still facing a confusion whether this is the reality of the Taliban that are now talking about, or that was the reality of the Taliban.
Will you try to leave the country, or will you stay? And if you stay, why?
For the time being, I'm staying in the country because, you know, we can't leave the country, all of us. Like, this country needs us, and this is our country, and we need to be in our country in order to live a good life. So for sure, we have, everyone has got feeling for the country, especially when it needs you. And so you can't escape that easily. I will be here until I can do something as an Afghan to my country, to my people.
And we hope that.
And this is exactly why we should make sure that we're taking in the women from Afghanistan, not the men that didn't fight, the men that ran, the men that fought only for the Taliban. We don't want them here. But we should be noble enough to allow the weakest, the women, to leave if they want to leave. Because, you know, the men will, as it were, and do often, because of them, you know, just naturally physically fitter, tend to make their own way and leave their women behind anyway. So if we're going to have a purpose-built system by which people can flee Afghan, then let's target it towards the women. And also let us make it a clear thing that if there is an Afghan Christian, that they be given refugee status. Afghan Christians should receive refugee status. I know that the liberal media don't want to acknowledge that there are Afghan Christians. They want to hide the fact. They downplay every act of persecution against Christians, but that doesn't mean that we need to go along with them.
That yourself and your family and friends all remain safe.
We've got an ad coming up. I can't stop it.
Thank you.
There we go.
Farzana Kochai speaking to me a little earlier. But I've also been speaking to the Afghan journalist Bilal Sawari, who's also in the Afghan capital. And I asked him whether he thought the Taliban this time around might be different.
Well, we will have to see, how the Taliban conduct themselves. They definitely say their political leadership that they're different, that they're offering an amnesty, and that things will be different this time around. The Taliban political leadership knows that they're fighters and commanders who are hot-headed, hot-blooded, more rigid, more extremist, could do things on the ground differently, as we have seen across the country, from brutality to harsh sentences, to the idea that they have in their minds that they can win everything militarily, which is actually, what has happened. They have got all of Afghanistan now. So we'll have to see how the Taliban emerge from that transition of fighting and then governing.
Right.
And I think that the West is kidding itself if it actually believes that the Taliban are going to be anything different. It is willful self-deceit if we honestly think that these Islamists are not going to behave like Islamists.
Talks tomorrow, we are told, in Doha, between what remains of the government, if we can call it that, and the Taliban. What on earth do the Taliban have to talk about? They've got everything they want, haven't they?
I think it's about political settlement. It's about power sharing deal. This must have been the work of the Americans in the background, because the Taliban would know that if they want international legitimacy, if they want future funding, that's how it has to be. This would be the position of Taliban if they thought logically. And what I'm saying, let's wait and see. But for now, at least the people here in this city, in this country, have clarity, both from the Taliban and the Afghan government, confirming that President Ashraf Ghani has been sidelined, that there would be a transitional government which will focus on a ceasefire, which will focus on a road ahead for political settlement.
As we know,
we absolutely should not accept power sharing with the Taliban. What we should be doing is we should be throttling them immediately. And we should be seeking to back and support any group that is willing to fight them. What we mustn't do is somehow normalize Islamist rule, or go along with the idea that the Islamists are a legitimate government. Remember, they took it by force. It wasn't that they were voted in. They took it by the gun. And so why start talking about them if they are a legitimate government? To me, it just sounds like the whole of the West is cowering like a school child. And we're going to hear a bit more from a progressive right now.
ISIS are in Afghanistan, Hizb Islamiyah are in Afghanistan, the Haqqani organization are in Afghanistan. All these organizations, terror organizations, are at large. There's the old warlords faction, Gulbuddin Hekmatyar, the list goes on. The Taliban has very small control over these groups, does it not?
It has no control over these groups.
The Taliban are now in total control of the country, almost. They are also in control of ample amounts of weapons, ammunitions, aircraft, helicopters, airports. How they lead from here is a million-dollar question.
Meantime, two countries that we don't talk about enough, but we should in this, Pakistan, who made the Taliban, huge influence now in Afghanistan, and China, of course, who took no part in the invasion. The market's wide open for China.
Well, I think this is a really important point, which is that another reason why we didn't win in Afghanistan is because we never brought Pakistan to heel. Pakistan and the Taliban are completely intermeshed with one another. The Taliban were the creation of Pakistan. And, and you can't win a fight against, a hydra unless you're willing to go for the body that, that feeds it. You can chop off its head, but it'll just grow back. And the reality is we never ever tackled Pakistan, and we're still not tackling Pakistan. Pakistan is a carbuncle on the side of the world. It is a wart in world politics. It is a spreader of hatred, violence, bigotry, terrorism, and yet no one will stand up to it except India. And it is time that we brought Pakistan to heel. Because think about it now, you have Islamists in Pakistan and you have Islamists in Afghanistan, and Pakistan is a nuclear power. So what happens if the Islamists decide to try and topple Pakistan and turn that into an Islamist state, which they might not even need to fire a shot? They could probably do it democratically. The reality is you've then got a Islamist movement with access to nuclear weapons. And it is all because we were not willing to deal with Pakistan as an extension, the Taliban as an extension of Pakistan. And Pakistan is politically two-faced. Says one thing to the West and then stabs us in the back at every turn. And yet your governments are sending Pakistan money. Just go and look at how much UK aid goes to Pakistan. And then go and look into how Pakistani Christians are treated like second-class citizens. Look at the treatment of Hindus in Pakistan. Or why haven't we put it under economic sanction? Why haven't we tackled it in any way or challenged it in any way on the world stage? It's because the soy boy progressive liberals are frightened and they only can see China. You know, this is the new baddie on the street, China, because the progressives don't think in terms of religion. It's a consistent blind spot on their worldview. All they think about is the wars, you know, of 50 years ago. It's all about the Cold War, finding the new Cold War enemy.
Well, the regional dynamics have to be addressed here. Afghanistan's neighbors, have to play their own role in a future in this country that is about prosperity, that's about trade. Because Afghanistan can serve as a land bridge between, Central Asia and South Asia, and there are a lot of opportunities. But we have to really wait and see what we are looking at, what type of international commitment there is. Will funding stop? Will the Taliban, for example, allow girls' education? These are all questions that I simply, would like to see the Taliban answer them practically rather than I can speculate about it. But there are fears, genuine fears and concerns about the Taliban. This is a group that was fighting for 20 years. So they are still a mystery in some ways to the people.
Bilal, thanks very much indeed for your time.
Thank you.
Bilal Suari speaking to us earlier. Well, following an emergency meeting of the government's Cobra Committee, the Prime Minister said he would prioritise getting British nationals out, but also do what he could now to help the Afghan people.
It's clear that there is going to be, or there is going to be very shortly, a new government in Kabul, or a new political dispensation, however you want to put it. And I think it's very important that the West collectively should work together to get over to that new.
It's talking about the West working together. Another thing, another reason why we lost is because when we talk about the West, we're really just talking about the United States, the UK, and a few others. Incidentally, Poland. Always Poland is the bravest of, the EU countries. And many of the countries in NATO are just not pulling their weight. Germany isn't pulling its weight at all. There's lots of NATO countries that are just useless allies. They're there for the ride. They're there for the easy way. Turkey's not pulling its weight. Turkey tried to get us into a conflict with Russia, for crying out loud, over Syria. why are we allowing these countries to have a free ride at the expense of the rest of us? Germany, Turkey should just be expelled from NATO completely. It's not a worthy ally. It should just be expelled. But Germany should certainly be challenged on the fact that it isn't pulling its weight and it isn't doing its bit. And we should stop. We should stop just excusing the foot dragging, backstabbing attitudes of countries that call themselves our allies. I mean, Germany is already a soft touch on Salafism, and just lets the Salafists do whatever they want in Germany. It's a soft touch on the Islamists.
Government, be it by the Taliban or anybody else, that nobody wants Afghanistan once again to be a breeding ground for terror. Of course,
which it will be.
Continue to attach huge importance to human rights, to equalities. Think of everything that the UK has helped to achieve.
Now, this is the complete hypocrisy of the West. They talk about we want to stand up for human rights and we want to stand up for equality. You had your chance when people were converting to Christianity, and rather than defend their right to convert to Christianity, you suppressed their right along with the bigots in Afghanistan. Until you are willing to accept that you need to stand up against Islamic attitudes that are against people leaving Islam, you're going to lose every time.
Over the last 20 years, the sacrifice of that mission, a lot of women and girls were educated thanks to the efforts of the UK. Human rights, equalities were promoted and protected.
That is a lie. You allowed Christians to be persecuted and you didn't do anything to defend them, just like you did in Iraq.
In a way that Afghanistan hadn't seen before. Of course, we don't.
Got an ad coming up. I can't stop it.
Away.
Really friendly, but also super.
So, Operation Enduring Freedom, the Americans called it, bombing the Taliban from power after the 9/11 attacks 20 years ago. Freedom there assuredly was for many Afghans, but security and genuine government control there was not. The long erosion of freedom then turbocharged to destruction the moment America signaled the date for military exit.
Appearances can deceive. The Taliban have not overthrown the secure government of a country. They've gradually eroded the Kabul administration year by year, which has controlled less and less of its territory. There has not been peace or stability.
And this is the thing that we all need to recognize, is that the Islamists will never, ever stop. They are motivated by a religious ideology, and they are going to continue their fight, and they'll never stop. So the only response to that is to be as equally committed to their defeat as they are to yours. And this is where Western secular ideologies fail, because Western secular ideologies are concerned with this world, and so they look for compromise, and so they look for accommodation, and that is why the Islamists will win against secular liberal ideologies. That's why they win against communism, because you have to come at these Islamists with a heart and a mind of steel. And you have to be as dedicated to defeating them as they are to defeating you. And we keep letting these Islamists gain a toehold in different territories because we're not willing to do what we need to do to win.
Grown and nurtured over the border in Pakistan, it was that country which allowed the Taliban phenomenon to sweep to power before being ousted 20 years ago. And Pakistan, which has allowed the Talibs to regroup and return. The moment Americans set a date to pull out their troops, the Taliban's 20-year war was won. denying Afghan troops air support removed the fundamental of all the training America had lavished upon them. That, along with the Taliban's strategy of paying government forces to surrender and go home unscathed, sealed the fate of the government the West has propped up for 2 decades.
And that's my point. Like, these people weren't fighting because they believed in something. They were just fighting for the paycheck. So if someone says to them, I'll pay you not to fight, well, that's what they did. And the reality is that one of the ways that this could have been done more successfully is to have kept a smaller force in Afghanistan that would serve as the backbone of the wider Afghan army, that were willing to fight when they felt the presence of the West. So we could have had a much more reduced force in Afghanistan helping the Afghan army fight the war. And let's not forget, there were thousands of Afghan soldiers that did die fighting the Taliban. And we shouldn't forget that.
20 years ago, US B-52 bombers carpet-bombed the Taliban out of the country. The mission? To remove al-Qaeda after the September the 11th attacks. Celebrations on the streets of...
And Osama bin Laden was found in Pakistan, a country that we haven't been brought to heel at all. I supported the war in Afghanistan. I supported the idea of war in Afghanistan. But then for Bush, for very personal and private reasons, decided that he was also going to topple Saddam Hussein, which I totally didn't agree with. The war in Iraq, that was ridiculous. And the reality was that was became a massive distraction to the fight in Afghanistan, and was completely unnecessary. When actually all of that time, energy, and resource could have been spent on defeating the Taliban in Afghanistan and Pakistan. In fact, it would have served our goals better to have invaded Pakistan rather than to have invaded Iraq.
Kabul.
Thanks to our military and our allies and the brave fighters of Afghanistan, the Taliban regime is coming to an end.
Elections would follow. Hamid Karzai would be president. A new parliament, women free not just to work, to vote, but to be MPs. None of that remotely possible during the Taliban years of
But Christians were not allowed to exist, and people weren't allowed to convert to Christianity. I'm going to keep saying it because the media won't.
Absolute male dominance, women abolished in public life. But then began the unceasing attacks across the country from the Taliban, who were down but never out. America finally simply could not, would not sustain the operation.
For many of you, this will be your last tour in Afghanistan. And by the end of this year, the transition will be complete and Afghans will take full responsibility for their security, and our combat mission will be over. America's war in Afghanistan will come to a responsible end.
There was no responsible end, of course.
No, and that's utterly true. The way we've just ran out of Afghanistan is ridiculous. We could have had a staged withdrawal. We could have. There's so many things that we could have and maybe should have done, rather than just like moonlight overnight and disappear. The sudden way that we left, I think, is partly what evaporated the will and determination of those that would resist to resist. But I'm already hearing reports in certain media outlets of certain groups in Afghanistan rallying against the Taliban, and it is absolutely important that we support those groups. We should absolutely support those groups who are fighting against the Taliban.
So two great strands of Afghan opinion now. One we hear in the West, educated English-speaking urban Afghans lamenting the loss of human rights from the relatively secure cities. if the Taliban come again. We almost never hear from rural Afghans, though, who will tell you the Taliban rooted out so much corruption and brought the stability the West never could. Perhaps it boils to one main question now, and only one group can answer it: the Taliban. What?
The idea that the Taliban rooted out corruption's absolutely ridiculous. Corruption is endemic across the whole of Afghani society. You know, it's a trait of economically underdeveloped countries that you end up with a lot of corrupt figures. And let's not forget, the Taliban are going to be bringing back flogging, execution, killing people for apostasy. They've already taken sex slaves, war booty. You know, are we really going to try and pretend that these things aren't happening? And do you think that those rural populations who can feel the influence of the Taliban are going to turn around and risk their own lives by becoming open out critics to Western media? I mean, this is the naivety of Channel 4's commentary on that.
Kind of Taliban 2 will it be? What strategic lessons have they learned, be it human rights or allowing their country to be a base for those who wish to attack the West?
Oh, this kind of desperate hope that the Taliban are going to embrace human rights. Like, wake up, you clowns.
West. The Taliban always said they've got no problem with any foreign country. Their fatal error, though, last time around was to foster those who do. Have they changed?
So,
no, they haven't.
What strategy can the international community now grasp from the wreckage of comprehensive defeat? I've been speaking to the former head of the British Army, Lord Richard Dannatt, and Hosna Jalil, who was an interior minister in the Afghan government. I asked her if there are any strategic choices now left.
I can't say it's too late for the, I would say for the big decision makers of war all over the world. I can't say it's too late for them, even now, to save Afghanistan and the rest of the world.
Even now?
They have, even now, because they have, I would say, I share the responsibility, and I personally hold myself and my government accountable for the miseries we go through, but I share it equally with the rest of the world, with our international allies. What I would say is that right now that we have handed over everything to the Taliban, we are on the way to promote a terrorist group to a terrorist state.
I hope you're all listening to this, woman.
We are handing over a nation to a terrorist group, which is going to be their strength. But at the same time, that terrorist group is not going to be a normal terrorist state. They do have access to modern Western-made equipments, women, ammunitions. But at the same time, they're going to have an air force. They have access to an aircraft.
Because you raise a huge issue there. That's the point, isn't it, Richard? I mean, the West went into Afghanistan 20-odd years ago to get rid of al-Qaeda, essentially. It wasn't initially nation building. Here we are again, and as Hosna Jalil says, we are about to see, in her words, a terrorist government.
Yes, I think that is the stark reality of where we were. We're having to live with the consequence of bad choices in the last 20 years. Good choice to go into Afghanistan 2001, sweep out the Taliban, sweep out al-Qaeda, correct. But then being misguided enough to go into Iraq in 2003, not to involve ourselves in nation building in Afghanistan 2003, 4, 5, 6, that was a strategic error of biblical proportions. Now, that said, over the last 5, 10, 15 years, we've patiently built up the Afghan state, their government, their economic capability, and significantly their security forces.
And that is the flaw, that is the fundamental flaw of Western strategy, is that we built up a state. We didn't win an ideological struggle. We didn't even engage in an ideological struggle because the progressives are frightened to do ideological struggle against Islam, particularly in Islamic societies. The progressives have this liberal guilt. So they think that we'll build up the state, but we won't try to change the values. We won't try to change the beliefs. Except, you know, and the thing is, if you try to uphold things like women's values, women's rights, in an ideological framework that argues that men and women are not equal, which Islam does, it literally says that a woman's testimony is not worth that as much as a man, that inheritance laws are different for men and women, and that Christians are, you know, that a free Christian man is a worse creature than a Muslim slave. They don't have the matrix that says that human beings are made in the image of God and therefore they are equal. Of course, your values are going to be uprooted because they've got no earth, no fertile earth to put down roots. And the problem with the West is we went in there and built up a state, but we didn't do any follow through in terms of trying to uproot the bad ideas and the bad attitudes and the bad beliefs of Islam, and replace it with a better one, i.e. Christianity. The West missionaries got into Afghanistan in any case, but they weren't allowed to operate openly. And converts from Islam were not exactly welcomed by the West because it was seen as a bit of you're causing a nuisance to the work of sort of bedding a security situation down, because they didn't want to upset and affront the Afghan people. But the reality is that it's only through conversion are you going to solve this problem. It's only through having confidence in a different belief system that is better than Islam, and saying, actually, Muslims, you should become Christian, that you're going to ultimately defeat the Islamist. You're not going to beat it through building up states.
But once President Biden decided that he was going to leave by the date of 9/11, 20 years on, that sent a terrible message to the people of Afghanistan. We didn't have terribly many US and international troops in Afghanistan the last 4 or 5 years, but what they were doing was providing technical and moral support to the Afghan National Security Forces. And they were doing a good job containing the Taliban. As soon as the Americans and British decided to leave and the others decided to leave, the technical capability was reduced, the morale of the Afghan National Forces has gone down, and we're living with the consequences. No strategic choices now, just an operational reality and a tactical embarrassment.
I want to argue that we have lots of strategical choices. This is absolutely ridiculous. The whole of the Western establishment is talking as if we don't have options. We do have options. We have lots of options. And I'm going to get into them in a second. But to the UK's credit, the UK did want to continue and stay on, even as the Americans were pulling out and wanting to pull out. But the rest of the world has got no stomach for the fight. And this is the point. If I can say anything that you remember from this conversation, it's this, is that you can only defeat the Islamist movement by being as tenacious and as determined to defeat them as they are to defeat you. But unless you accompany that determination to defeat them with a determination to see Muslims become Christians, then you aren't going to win in the long run.
Okay, tactical embarrassment, no strategic choices, but let me clutch at one possible straw of hope, perhaps, in this. Hosna Jalil, the Taliban need international recognition, and the Taliban government will need money. That's about all we've got to negotiate with. Is there any way the world can extract some kind of, how can I put it, more reasonable Taliban?
And that's your progressives for you. That's your progressives for you. They need recognition. In other words, what we're saying is, let's recognize them as a government. Let's accommodate to them. Let's compromise with them. and they can be influenced by money. How materialistic. This is why the progressives lose, is because they understand the conflict in a two-dimensional picture, rather than understanding it in that it has a spiritual dimension. And I use that in the broadest sense of the term, but it has a spiritual dimension that progressives just refuse to accept or to see. And we do have options. One, we should get in there and create an insurgency against the Taliban. We should arm that insurgency, because there will be Afghanis that are willing to fight. There's always been Afghanis willing to fight the Taliban. They were fighting the Taliban the first time round, like the Northern Alliance, those groups, those kinds of groups. I don't know how many Shia that are, but perhaps the Shia, if they could be consolidated into a geographical space. We should create an insurgency, and we should support that insurgency. We should clamp down on economic sanctions and strangle the economy completely to the ground. And we should bomb them to dust. And we should keep bombing them in an aerial campaign until they do what we say and when we say it. And any resistance at all just results in more bombs. We do not have to surrender. We do not have to give up. We do not have to accept defeat. And it is the weak-willed and spineless attitudes of our governments that are surrendering. We don't have to surrender. We can still win, but we have to fight to win rather than do what we have done, which is just try to tolerate them. Like the British soldiers in Afghanistan, for crying out loud, unless they were being fired at, had to ask permission to engage the Taliban. How do you win a war if you don't want to defeat your enemies? And this is the reality. We were trying to fight a war against the Taliban by putting huge mittens onto our armed forces so that they couldn't prosecute the war properly, whilst our enemies did not have any of the same hang-ups. It's because our governments are weak, because their ideology is weak.
Taliban government in exchange for that recognition? Is there a chance?
The strategic choice we can have is the political pressure we can put on Taliban, at the same time on its allies, on its supporting states. And I have to be brutally honest here, we need to pressurize Taliban here, and they can play a wonderful role.
Do you see?
The state that we're talking about is Pakistan. That's the state that we're talking about. You cannot defeat the Taliban unless you're willing to bring Pakistan to heel, and Pakistan needs to have consequences for it. There needs to be consequences for Pakistan for its support to the Taliban, because every British and American soldier that died, and of any other nation, well, there is the hint of support that came from Pakistan for that.
Any chance, any sliver of hope there that there is something we can get leverage with there?
I think the problem the Taliban will have got, if as looks pretty likely they will have taken complete control of Afghanistan, is where do they go for support in the future? Okay, last 24 hours they've taken control of Jalalabad, so that's opened up the way to Pakistan, the Islamic State of Pakistan, an Islamist state quite clearly in Afghanistan. So maybe they've now got a good ally in Pakistan. But is that enough? Because Pakistan is not everyone's favorite country. Then you look the other way, you look to Iran. I don't think there are many common bedfellows between the Iranian Shia regime in Iran and what will likely to be in Kabul.
Sure. The key issue for Afghanistan.
I mean, the irony is we're going to end up with two kinds of Islamists facing off to one another. The Taliban, who are Sunni, and the Shia, and the Iran, who are Shia. They're both Islamist regimes, which is why we shouldn't be in a panic. Oh, there's an Islamist regime. We've had Islamist regimes for decades, but we but yeah, those two groups are going to be facing off with one another. And, you know, I do think that uniting, I mean, I don't genuinely know what the sheer population of Afghanistan is, but there's certainly going to be groups that want to fight back against the Taliban, and we should be doing everything to help them. And close to the border of Iran may be the best place to start that resistance, possibly, because it would be very easy for Iran to send supplies across, because they don't want to face one Islamist government in Saudi Arabia on one side, along with the other ones in the Middle East, and face another Sunni Islamist government in Afghanistan at the same time.
After centuries, let's face it, of instability, is security. There are many Afghans, Hosna Jalil, as you know well, who say, look,